Welcome in, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, we recap week 1 of the 2022 CFL season. Lots of great action this week, and I'm really excited to get into it today. But really quickly, before we get started, if you want to support the channel, as always, be sure to hit like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Takes 2 seconds, makes a massive difference for this channel, helps me out in reaching more people on YouTube, and I would really appreciate it. And with that said, let's talk about this week's game, starting with Montreal at Calgary from last Thursday night, the kickoff game of this season. And this was really the perfect CFL game, to be honest with you. It had a little bit of everything. If I was a new person watching the CFL, if I wanted to introduce somebody to watch the CFL, this is the type of game I'd want to show them. It had a little bit of everything. Good amount of defensive plays, good amount of offensive plays, big plays, lead changes. The final 3 minutes were great as well. A lot of controversy in terms of injuries as well. So, those are my main reactions to the game. I think it was just a really great game played by both teams. I think it could have went either way at the end of the day. So before I go specifically into any teams, I just wanted to say that. But in terms of where I take away or what I take away from this game for either team, starting with Montreal, and you have to start with the William Stanback injury, the star running back in the CFL, I think undisputably the best running back in the CFL today, and it looks like he may be out for the entire season, fractured his ankle, and I mean, I'm no doctor, I don't know what the recovery time is on that, but it looked extremely serious. And I'm just really concerned that this could really affect the Montreal Alouettes going forward, because they are a team that needs the running game to succeed. And Jeshurun Antwi, the Canadian guy, came in as a backup here and actually played really well down the stretch in that game versus Calgary. But how is he going to be in a full-time role going forward? He's certainly not going to be William Stanback. That's unfair to ask. And I think that this team needs that elite level ground presence, like I said, because they don't really have a very good short to intermediate passing game that can open up the deep passing game down the field. Basically, when that running game is not going, they tend to struggle. And I think that going forward, that is going to be a big question for this team. Can they continue to attack defenses downfield with a lack of running game, or can they get that running game to still be productive without William Stanback, the best running back in the entire CFL? So, I mean, just a gigantic loss, and I think it could change the complexion of this season for the Alouettes. In this game, I think you also saw the good and the bad from Vernon Adams. You obviously saw the spectacular plays, the one he made down near the goal line where he hurdled a guy to get into the end zone. You probably don't want to be doing that too often if you're a quarterback, especially given Vernon's injury history recently with missing the rest of the season last year. So, that was a concerning thing from that aspect, but still a spectacular play. He made several spectacular throws in this game using that improvisational ability. He just has that special ability to do that. I don't think any other CFL quarterback really has the capability to do that at that high of a level, but at the same time, you still see the mistakes in terms of the mental side of the game. He threw a pass late across the middle, was intercepted by linebacker Jameer Thurman, who had just an excellent game once again for the Stampeders. So I think you saw the good and the bad from Vernon Adams in this game. The mental side of the game is still coming along all these years later in his CFL career, but the physical talent is just so apparent. And I think that in terms of that physical ceiling, he's arguably the top guy in the CFL. He just needs to learn how to put it together on a week-to-week basis. And with that Stanback injury, he's really going to have to put this team on his back, I believe. And will be interesting to see if he can do that. Now, on the Calgary side of things, I think the big discussion is obviously the quarterback situation, with Bo Levi-Mitchell getting hurt once again, ending up in a walking boot. I don't know what the extent is of the injury, if he's going to play this week against Hamilton, but it didn't look good, and it doesn't look good that he just keeps on getting injured almost every time he steps on the field in recent years. He just cannot seem to stay healthy and shake that injury bug. And to be honest, before he got hurt, he didn't play particularly well either. He had some good moments. He actually started the game pretty hot. I think he was like 8 of 11 to start the game. Really cooled off towards halftime, where I believe he was 10 of 20 at halftime, and ultimately finished with pretty pedestrian numbers. But ultimately, I just think you saw a lot of the same problems with Bo Levi-Mitchell that you saw last season. Just the lack of mobility is just so glaring at this point. Probably the least mobile quarterback in the CFL right now. And, I'm not talking about taking off and running, but just, his ability to maneuver within the pocket. Even though Calgary has a good offensive line, I think you're still going to have to move around and step up in the pocket. And I don't think Bo Levi really has that capability right now, or he's not showing it consistently. And then after Mitchell gets hurt, he gets replaced by Jake Maier, his backup, and ultimately he leads the team down the field for the game-winning field goal. And Maier has just been incredibly impressive in the unlimited amount of appearances he's had at the CFL level. But, I just think this guy, for what he's shown, he deserves a longer look. And if Bo Levi is even close to, not being 100%, I think you have to start Maier next week if you're the Stampeders. I think the team has just shown the last 2 years that they're moving the ball better when Maier's in there. He gives them a little bit more movement ability in the pocket, and, that will help out the offensive line. I think he throws the ball with a little bit more zip. Mitchell's lost a little bit of that as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's kind of a torch passing here between Mitchell and Maier here. Maybe it's too early to say that. I just want to throw that out there. But ultimately, going to be really interesting to see how this quarterback situation plays out in Calgary going forward. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on why I think Calgary was able to come out on top in this game, despite not really playing their best football. And that's because they're just such a well-rounded physical football team. Kadeem Carey is such a huge part of that at the running back position. But you saw that offensive line already making their presence felt late in this game. And I think that is such a crucial aspect to this team and why I had so much confidence in this team when I made my preseason predictions, because you just see on both sides of the ball, they bring that physicality and well-rounded ability that they can make up for days that they don't play very well offensively, especially in the passing game. And I think that you saw that play out on Thursday night. Now moving on to last Friday night's game between the Ottawa Redblacks and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, with Winnipeg winning 19-17, sneaking this one out, even though Ottawa, I believe, was the better team throughout this game. They could not capitalize on their opportunities. That's basically the main takeaways overall that I take away from this game. A blown opportunity really for Ottawa to really capitalize on what was a great debut game to the season. Unfortunately, we're not going to remember it as that because of the loss. But getting into specifically what I take away from these teams in this game, for Ottawa, Mazzoli looked really comfortable in this offense. I just didn't think it was going to come together as fast as it did. Obviously, you have a few things that are comfortable for him. He has this center that he had in Hamilton and Darius Sirocco. You had Jalen Acklin at wide receiver. Jalen Acklin actually dropped a would-be touchdown in this game, but he also made up for it with some nice plays as well. But I just didn't think it was going to come together this quickly for Mazzoli in Ottawa. But he just looked so efficient. He threw for nearly 400 yards. Should have been a lot more too. And honestly, I think this is such a good sign if you're the Red Blacks, because you just had so many moving pieces. You knew the talent was there with all of these guys they brought in free agency, but you just didn't know if the chemistry was going to work out. So this first game, seeing them in action for the first time, is a really good sign going forward if you're a Red Blacks fan, and I'm really excited to see what they do in the following weeks. And then on the Winnipeg side, I felt they looked very vulnerable throughout this game. You saw that they really didn't have any ability to run the ball whatsoever, and that is incredibly concerning considering how much this team relied on the running game the past few seasons in their quest to win back-to-back Grey Cups. And I think that it's not a concern yet just because it's been one game, and Ottawa, a completely new team, so you have the element of surprise in there as well. But the fact that they were at home and they couldn't provide any push whatsoever up front, that is a little concerning to an extent. So I'm really interested to see how Winnipeg responds in a rematch next week against Ottawa, and if they can get a little bit more push up front, get Oliveira and Augustine going in the running game, and I think that would really help Zach Collaros in this passing game, really open it up, because I think Collaros didn't really have too good of a day either. He only threw for like 186 yards. They just weren't moving the ball very well that game against Ottawa, so they were very lucky that they were able to squeak out a win here, but it's going to be interesting to see how this team performs in that regard going forward in terms of the running game and just their overall execution as a team. Now, before we move on to the next game, I just want to make special mention of quarterback Drew Brown, the backup for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who comes in for Zach Collaros after Collaros is forced to be removed from the game due to a scary hit that he took. Brown comes in cold off the bench, makes 3 precise throws down the field, and ultimately gets them in field goal position to win that game and ultimately save what would be an opening night embarrassment for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now moving on to Saturday's action, starting with the Saskatchewan Roughriders hosting the Hamilton Tiger Cats, with Saskatchewan winning 30-13. And this was kind of an ugly game for most of it. Honestly, the offenses just didn't get anything going for most of this game. But ultimately, Saskatchewan makes a few more plays in the second half and ultimately pulls out the home W in the opener. In terms of the Tiger Cats, we'll start with them. You just have to start right up front with that offensive line play, which was just dreadful from the very first snap in this game. Dane Evans really didn't have a shot. I see people saying that Dane Evans should potentially be on the hot seat in terms of potentially losing his starting job. I've been reading that from some people already. But it's been one game. Saskatchewan usually dominates this matchup in Saskatchewan. And this offensive line was just dreadful from day one, or snap one in this game. You have guys like Travis Vornkal, who really struggled at left tackle. Chris Van Zyl, usually a stud at right tackle, really didn't get out of the blocks very quickly in this game. And then Alex Fontana at center. I think he was probably the worst guy out there on Saturday night. So the same old problems that you saw last season for the Tiger Cats, this was a major issue all of last season, and it really wasn't corrected really too much. I'm really interested to see what changes we see from this Hamilton offensive line in the following weeks here, because it was just a dreadful performance. Maybe it was just due to the hostile environment. First game of the season, they're still trying to work out the kinks, but it did not look good. They looked like easily the worst offensive line from week one. And then sticking with Hamilton, another thing that I really didn't think helped was the fact that they completely abandoned the running game very early in this game. They averaged like 2 yards per carry, but they really didn't have many attempts. And when that offensive line is playing so bad in pass protection, you should have ran the ball a little bit more, I think, especially when the game was so close. And ultimately, I just think that this has been a recurring theme for the Tiger Cats. They've become a very pass-heavy team the past couple of years, and they ultimately, a lot of the time, abandon the running game during games. And, you know, I don't think that's the best strategy, really. I think it just puts a lot of stress on this offensive line, especially with Dane Evans being more of a pocket passer. You need that pass protection, and you need that, that hesitation from that defensive line about whether it's going to be a run play or a pass play. So, I mean, that is something to watch with this team going forward, but I think that was a big mistake they made on Saturday night. Now on the Saskatchewan side of things, I think their defensive line really came to play, and I think in my roster reviews, I only had them ranked 6th in terms of their defensive line, and that's because they really only had that superstar in AC Leonard and then a bunch of younger guys that had potential but haven't really proved it on a consistent basis yet. Obviously, McConaughey leaving in free agency as well, but I think those guys really stepped up, and the Riders have just done a tremendous job the last couple of years in terms of bringing in new faces, bringing in young players to this defensive line, especially in the front seven, and ultimately getting production out of them. Charleston Hughes kind of had a little bit of a renaissance game, had a sack. Pete Robertson, a second-year guy, looked really good as well. And I think that if everything clicks for the Saskatchewan defense up front, it could be a very scary defense this year. And then the final thing with this game is I think that it was a good confidence builder for Cody Fajardo. I don't think this altogether is going to really raise his confidence, but I think it's a slow building moment for him. I think he made some good plays in this game. Obviously, there were some struggles throughout the middle portion of this game, but when it really mattered in the fourth quarter, they were able to move the ball. And ultimately, his stat line ends up being pretty good, 300 plus yards. I think he had another 40 on the ground. And I think it's a small step for Fajardo to recovering that confidence that it looked like he lost a lot of last season. And then the final game of week one was the BC Lions absolutely thrashing the Edmonton Elks by a score of 59-15. And I'm going to start with Edmonton first because You know, you could take this in a number of directions, but none of them are going to be good. We'll start with the quarterback position, and Nick Arbuckle ends up starting this game. And honestly, I didn't think he was really the problem with this team in this game. I just think defensively they had so many issues, other problems offensively, like the offensive line did not play well in this game. But Arbuckle made his fair share of mistakes as well. I just didn't think that he was worthy of being pulled for Trey Ford in the second quarter, which was just a very confusing switch to me. And then Arbuckle comes back in to start the the second half. It just didn't make much sense to me. I was very confused by that for Chris Jones. I mean, obviously he's a very unorthodox coach, but usually you don't fool with the quarterback position in that respect, especially in the first game of the season. So I thought that was very confusing. And ultimately, Taylor Cornelius also didn't dress for this game as well. They decided to go with the rookie Kai Loxley as their number 3 quarterback for this game. And, I mean, the handling the quarterback position, if they don't get this quarterback position right, I think they're in for a very, very long season. I'm not even just talking missing the playoffs. I'm talking worst team in the CFL yet again for the Edmonton Elks if they can't figure this position out fast. And if they can't figure out this defense fast, which is my other point here, is that linebacking core looked horrible. I mean, I usually don't think linebackers are that important in terms of the overall scheme of the defense. Just in terms of, finding that high-level guys, it's just really hard to be an elite-level linebacker, really, and be that difference-maker guy, because a lot of the time they're picked apart in terms of how they're playing pass defense. But ultimately, there were just so many missed tackles. It was just jumping off the page, really, in this entire game, and just made a lot of plays, big plays that really didn't need to be, just routine tackles that they were missing, and that is just stuff that needs to be cleaned up going forward if this team is going to even be competitive this year. I mean, it's not going to get easy for them. They're going to go and play Saskatchewan next Saturday, so very interested to see how this team bounces back, but what a terrible performance Saturday night. And then on the other hand, you have the BC Lions, who had a great start to the Nathan Rourke era at quarterback. Really couldn't ask for a better performance. 26 of 29, I think it was 78 rushing yards, 4 total touchdowns, just an all-around great performance from Rourke in this one, and that entire BC offense. James Butler, running back, had an outstanding performance as well. Really couldn't ask for a better performance, really, from any of those guys on the offensive side. And another encouraging sign was the fact that Lucky Whitehead and Brian Burnham, their 2-star guys, they didn't really make too many plays in this one. They made their fair share, but it wasn't like they were the focal point of the offense. So those other guys really stepped up and really carried the load for the majority of that game, really showed that they were a very balanced offense. I want to see how they do against a better team that's not Edmonton, but this is just nevertheless such a great sign going forward for this team. Really didn't know what to expect from this organization going into this year just because of that unknown at quarterback and that offensive line that looked pretty good in this game. But again, you got to see them against a team that's not Edmonton. I'm not going to get too high, too low, but it was a great start to this season for BC. And then the final thing I just wanted to touch on is the fact that the offseason additions for the BC Lions already looking like they're making an impact. So Luchez Purifoy at strong side linebacker looked really good, making impact plays all over the field. Not like I wasn't expecting that from him. He's one of the most impactful players in all of the CFL. And then Matthew Betts at defensive end had a couple of sacks after not even having a single sack in 2021 with Edmonton. Gets a couple against his former club here. Great to see the former high draft pick really living up to his potential in that first game with BC. Let's see if he can keep it going. But I'm really excited to see if these new additions can continue to make a big impact this year for BC. But ultimately, those are just my thoughts on week 1 of the 2022 CFL season. I'd love to hear yours down in the comment section. Be sure to hit like and subscribe on your way out the door. I would really appreciate that. And with that said, let me know in the comment section what you think, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.